ever since I was in high school, I wanted to be a hospital CEO. That was my main goal. It was what I wanted to do. My brother became a physician. It's like, yeah, I'm not smart enough to do that. I'm going to become a hospital CEO. So that's always been my goal. I love Thomas Sowell. He's an amazing economist. And, that particular quote he has up there, the what's in parentheses wasn't up. But we all know we talked about the cartel, and that was such a great description of not only the insurance companies, but also the providers. And I'll just say this, that when you're in the space and you're running a hospital, you've got the blinders on. You don't really understand the rest of the market. You don't have to. You don't have to understand that there are alternative payment models out there that may benefit the patient, right? You run the hospital, you've got your playbook, you do what you're told to do. So sort of some background, born in Canada, came down in 1991, met my wife. We're still married, she's incredibly patient. But my first real healthcare job was with the Canadian Coast Guard. Was at first a rescue swimmer on the Great Lakes, and then became a coxswain, a captain. Coxswain is a fancy British phrase for captain, I guess. And my first job after my administrative residency at the biggest hospital in Canada in Vancouver, it was 1,400 beds, and holy smokes, was that a great way to see bureaucracy in action. Canada, the hospitals at the time were given a budget for capital equipment, and I recall being in this board meeting, and it's like, hey, we've got $11 million left, we better spend it. If we don't spend it, it gets taken away. And so we were buying new furniture, new chairs, never mind the OR equipment. It was just a crazy way to run healthcare. So after my administrative residency, came back to Ottawa, and OHIP is the provincial plan of the national service that provides healthcare insurance for all of its constituents in that province. And they had asked me to do an analysis of the 5 hospitals in Ottawa to see if we shut down an ER 1, 2, 3 days a week, how much money would we save, and how many lives we lost. I'm like, I don't think I want to do this. Not really why I got into the business, into this industry. So moved down to the States, as I mentioned, and got my the MBA down at University of Texas, San Antonio to get my work visa. Forced my wife to marry me to get my green card. She still said that today, after 33 years. So now I just, I used to deny it. Now I go, yep. It's worked out pretty well. I've had a really interesting and great career. I've loved what I've done and learned so much. And I was never a podium CEO. I always got into the numbers, did the math, and probably been in about 2,000 procedures and operations over the years, right from colonoscopies to open heart. And if you've ever seen an open heart, oh my goodness, crazy. It looks like Six Flags in someone's chest, all this metal and stuff, gaping open chest. My first job out of school and was a de novo turnaround of a multimodality imaging center. And so the owners of that, it was just after Stark 1. So I'm going back and forth a little bit, back to the future and back to the past, as Mr. Sauer said. The Stark 1 was the first Stark law that came in. Prior to Stark 1, in imaging centers and a designated health service like an imaging center, any physician could invest. And it was like, hey Jay, I'm Dr. Strash. You need 10 MRIs at my imaging center. But no authorizations, just go for it. And literally before Stark 1, they were making distributions with a lunch bag full of cash to physicians. So fraught for abuse. First job was that turnaround. After Stark 1, most investors said, I can't get paid, I'm leaving. And so learned how to negotiate managed care contracts, and your single freestanding imaging center at Louis Pasteur and Fredericksburg Road in the medical center of San Antonio. You've got a ton of competition, but we did it. We turned it around, and because of that, the owner said, hey, we're opening up a this really cool thing. It's a physician-owned hospital. It's there's the first of three, and we're going to do it in Austin. They said, you want to do it? I said, sure. I've never done it, but let's go for it. So we did that. It was ground up, right from gravel all the way up, and we were the first, I guess of its kind. It was a medical office building, 2 stories. We had referring physicians and surgeons on the top floor, an elevator right down to our surgical hospital. We had imaging and we had PT, and it was all, the PT, imaging, and the surgical hospital were all under related entities. So we had the vertical coming up, and also from the top floor down from referrals. It was a good setup. There was a physician named Dr. Jacobson, believe it or not, same as we have a couple of those. I know one works over at CHM. Hey, Dr. J. But different Dr. Jacobson. He was a urologist and said, hey, we heard about what you're doing down there on Far West Boulevard in Austin. Come up to Round Rock and talk to us. The HCA division president heard about that and asked me to come to Dallas, and they offered me a job with HCA. I've always wanted to work for HCA. At the time it was Columbia, before they got into trouble. I'm going, you know what? Done these turnaround a small imaging center. That was pretty rough. I mean, my wife and I were actually out there repainting the parking lot lines because we had no money, right? We did everything, and it was a real team effort. The physician-owned hospital, we opened that up under a company called Surgical Health Corporation. We got purchased by Health South. That was interesting, and you all know the story there. So I'm thinking, I want some stability, and I've always wanted to work for HCA. They called, and so we took the offer. Did a number of years of mergers, acquisitions, and there's a funny story about a case that we did recently in Oregon with a surgery center that we had purchased back in the day. And then had 27 or so surgery centers after that, and then had an opportunity to go back into hospital operations, into big box hospitals, which I took, and really, really liked it. Had a good time. CSO is a acronym with HCA for a Chief Staffing Officer. It's a brutal position. They have an application called Plus. It's a productivity management tool, and on a daily basis, minute by minute, they have indicators and KPIs that measure the productivity of each and every department to the social security number of each employee. If you weren't hitting your numbers, if you were using contract labor on top of that, man, there were multiple calls every day. And if you didn't get it right, the division president would call and say, hey, I want names and socials of who's going to go home right now. It was that brutal. So that was not a fun part of the job at all. I'll come back to that in a second. But as I mentioned, always wanted to be a CEO. I'm in Georgia. The gentleman that hired me into HCA, when HCA became HCA, Columbia split up right after their big OIG investigation. They were the poster child for paying $1 billion in fines for something they didn't admit to doing. So it was, I mentioned to some folks earlier, it was really interesting at that age, being in the big corporation, man, this is awesome. They know how to run hospitals. And then seeing emails coming from Rick Scott, the CEO of Columbia at the time, at 3:00 in the morning. It was bizarre times. So when Columbia split up, became HCA. HCA was the major metropolitan hospitals that had market share, so therefore they could command managed care rates. And then Triad was mid-market, and LifePoint was rural. So the fellow that hired me at HCA took a Triad division, and said he was opening a hospital in Alaska. Would you want to go? And he said, what would Norma Jean think about that? My wife, right? So it was a 2-year deal. It was really a fantastic experience for me anyway. My wife, not so much. She didn't like Alaska that much. She made sure when 2 years came around, we were back on the plane down to the lower 48. But the way healthcare works in Alaska, in fact, I'm doing a case right now, bundling a case up there where it's a rotator cuff bundle. Anyone want to guess how much a rotator cuff is going to go for in Alaska? Here's a hint. The professional fee only is $22,000. So you can get that, 1/3 of that for the whole in bundle down in lower 48. So we're talking to them right now, and unfortunately the patient is a PA in the practice. The grandfather of the practice was a doctor that worked in a hospital in Alaska. And so I was mentioning earlier that if I need to call dad, I'm going to call dad and say, dude, get your son in line because we're not paying him $22,000 for an hour-and-a-half case. Otherwise, it's first-class trip down to Scottsdale. That was a great experience. So there up in Alaska, as many of you know, if you've worked up there, most of it is still percent of charges. And so a 75-bed hospital, the most beautiful hospital I've ever worked in, again, ground up. Sarah Palin was on our board. That was interesting. And for a 27 average daily census, that hospital was making almost $30 million a year free and clear, which is a little, out of the ordinary for hospitals in the lower 48. And that was back in 2007, right? So every year you increase your rates 9.9% to stay under the managed care radar, right? Because 10% they can look at your rates and ask you to renegotiate. So the rule of 10%, right? In 7 years it doubles. So I can only imagine right now what their charges are at that hospital. They've got to be horrendous. So the exponentially the bottom line has grown. I've got the opportunity to move to the lower 48. Story there is, we're driving down Oracle Boulevard, and I looked at my wife and said, hey, because they interview the family. And I said, hey, those are nice sandals, are those new? She goes, no, I haven't been able to wear them for 2 years. Don't mess up. I said, okay. So we, and then did a hospital in Phoenix. Got hired back by Chris Holden, an AM surgeon, moved to Alaska. And it was a time when I was making the most money in my life, but I was also the most unhappy. It was horrible to see how, and it wasn't anything wrong with the company, but to see how a board works in a publicly traded health company, it was interesting because it really wasn't about the patient at all. Of course, it was about share price, earnings per share, and then the benefits of board members and us, senior leadership. When we made an acquisition, the benefit, the equity event can be pretty tremendous at times. And so there's plenty of little stories about that I'd love to get into, but probably haven't got time. And then we purchased a company called Sheridan. And at that point, there was a pretty nice equity event, so I decided to exit and took a company in Austin called Arise. We had a surgical hospital, 3 surgery centers, doing about 20,000 surgeries a year and losing about $10 million a year. So the 3 main partners were personally guaranteed to the hilt. They were going to have to declare personal bankruptcy. A bit of a risk taker went in and essentially worked for a success fee to get the acquisition done or the sale. We sold to SCA about a year and a half later, ahead of time and at a price a little higher than we thought it would get. And it was their largest acquisition that year. Of course, they're part of United. I was asked to stay for a year. I couldn't work for a big corporation anymore, so I was looking for another challenge and took a company in Naples, Florida called Landmark. We had 7 hospitals. They were losing money. They were owned by one physician, majority owned, but he was a brilliant strategist and put the hospital right across the road from Arthrex. And so if you know Arthrex, they're like Stryker, they instrumentation, devices, etc. Our ORs were essentially Arthrex ORs, 20 by 30, 3 gorgeous ORs. The sterile corridor went down. All 3 ORs are on one side. They all had glass walls. You could see them in the ORs. 84-inch monitors. The OR lights, I've never seen them before, like this. They were 2 large lights for each bed, each table. And the lights spun so fast that there were, if you can imagine a light shining on a hand, there'd be a shadow, no shadows. The sterile field and the one OR projected straight over optical fiber optics to the Arthrex Learning Lab. And Reinhold, the founder of Arthrex, mentioned that he sees at least 30,000 surgeons coming through Arthrex a month. So we'd have our patients sign off on that to make sure we were allowed to show the sterile field and what we're doing, and essentially using mostly Arthrex equipment. We helped Arthrex develop their first knee implant and their first hip appliance as well. I had to sign an NDA. I can't tell you how much each one costs, but fractional of what we pay for them in the facilities, and we do bundles and all. So when you're looking at a $5,000 to a $10,000 implant, yeah, just think that, just say this, that 40% of the cost is not hard cost. We're way down there. And when they white box these items and send them down to the Caribbean for $800 a piece, you know what we're talking about. So why did I change? It was going great, loved it. Man, it's just got to be a point where the focus on the bottom line was so laser focused, and then conversations with patients, I got into it because I did want to help. Well, of course I wanted to make some money, but it got to a point where I was getting fairly unhappy, and we were doing great down at Landmark, but my wife said to me, hey, you're bringing this stuff home. There's got to be a change. Either you change or we change. So I didn't want that to happen. So, and some conversations, right? One on an airplane, the guy was fairly inebriated, and what do you do? And what do you do? So I run hospitals. Oh man, I hate hospitals. I hate hospital CEOs. And you guys are like used car salesmen. And then in my, at our youngest daughter's high school, the high school secretary said, hey, Mr. Strash, I have $4,000 out of pocket. I can't afford it. She's making $20 an hour. She can't afford it. And she's in tears, right? In front of everybody. So yeah, we said, no, you're good. We'll take that out. And after that, I just became very disgruntled. And of course, a number of other, right? It leads up to a point. It's a means to an end. And so I came home the next day and I was smiling. She said, what happened? I said, I quit. And she said, well, what are you gonna do now? I had met a gentleman named Dave Chase with Health Rosetta. And so we had actually had a broker come to us to talk about our few thousand employees, about putting them on a progressive plan. And so I wrote to him, and the rest is kind of history. It's met Troy Reichert, who's in the back. He's been amazing. He's an incredible guy. If you don't know Troy, you got to meet him. Troy introduced me to Jay and to Dr. Keith Smith, and it's the way healthcare should be. I've never been happier. Since probably the first day of my first hospital, you got rose-colored glasses on, like, yeah, made it, we're good. But never been happier. We get to help patients. They have no out-of-pocket, and talk a little more about that in a second. But it's just such a relief doing what we're doing now. And it's ironic because I talk to my colleagues that are still running hospitals, and here's a quote from one of them. Tell them what we're doing. He said, man, it sounds like you're selling snake oil. So we talk about blinders, right? You're in that space. You don't care about anything else going on. You've got your contracts. You've got surgeons coming in. You've got the playbook from corporate. Just follow the rules and do what you're told, and everything's going to be good. And that's the way, majority of hospitals are run these days. What's interesting is, if we talked to some folks, and those of you who know me now, I'm not real big on hospitals. I think they still do a good job. They're for a purpose. My mentor at HCA, a guy named Charlie Evans, who was the Eastern Group president and put me in my first hospital, great guy, great mentor, social worker by trade. When HCA, he was offered the job to take the CEO spot of HCA when they went private. I was in Alaska, I called him, and it was the first time I ever heard him talk negatively about HCA. He goes, yeah, you know what? Their pencils become a little too sharp. He goes, I'm retiring. But so he was my mentor that got me into hospitals, and he and I talked recently. He believes that hospitals, you probably thought of this as well, who knows, a decade, 2 decades from now, will be a place where you go to die. And when I first started in surgery centers, I think 30% of the cases could be done in ASCs. Now about 80% of the cases can be done in the ASCs. And those are only the ones that Medicare says you can do, right? The bundles, we can do whatever we want. If it's a safe environment, we could do an open heart in our center in San Antonio. But of course, we couldn't do that there. But we could if we had the capabilities to do so. My whole family's in healthcare. My wife is really my boss, is also my case manager and patient service extraordinaire. Our youngest daughter, who's graduating in May from Texas A&M, 4.0, 517 on her MCAT, could become a physician. And she's like, nope, she got engaged with a great guy. So she said she wants to become a nurse practitioner, raise a family, which I think is awesome. Our son is in med school. Dr. Kendrick Johnson right here helped him tremendously to get into Midwestern. Thank you, Kendrick. He's never been happier in his life. He still doesn't get the free market model yet, but he doesn't listen to dad, right? He might listen to Kendrick, and he'll definitely listen to Jay and Dr. Smith. So we'll get him there. And then our oldest daughter, who really just helped her get into Trinity University, which is probably the premier MHA program in the country. But after that, she's done it all on her own. I mean, I mentioned a decade with HCA. So she's with HCA right now, got that on our own. And, rose-colored glasses at this point. We're very, very, very proud of her. We don't talk negatively about hospitals at all. And she's like, Pops, what are you doing now? So, well, if I send you a patient, that patient will have no out-of-pocket. And her comment is, that is so cool. Understand, right? You've been patients before. You may know how the operation works. As an outpatient, you go in, and of course, they make the call beforehand about your financial responsibility, how you're going to handle that. The morning of, you get in there at 6 o'clock in the morning, you've had your first coffee, maybe, if you're the husband or wife or the person accompanying the patient. And then someone from the business office comes down with a clipboard or an iPad and goes, hey, Mr. Kempton, how are you going to handle your $4,000 out of pocket today? Right? It's a horrible conversation to have. It doesn't happen in this space. It's awesome. Love it. And if you're an inpatient, there's a whole different strategy. You don't go up the first day of recovery, the second day of recovery, and you call the nurse station and say, hey, is Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so in the room with the patient? Yes, okay. Coming up to talk to them about their, their financial responsibility. It's horrible. Some hospitals, you can't leave the ER if the doors are over here and you're ambulatory and, they treat you and they street you. Stabilize you, of course, but the business office will be here and the locked doors are there. You can't leave, all right, unless the business office lets you out. It's horrible. That was a CHS strategy. I worked for them. It was not the best time of my life. They received $1.6 billion in COVID bailout. During COVID years, they managed to sue 40,000 patients for their out-of-pocket. Although we as taxpayers gave them $1.6 billion. Nice. I'll say this, HCA gave all their $6 billion back. And HCA doesn't sue patients. I'm not an HCA guy, but they're also, when I do a GFE with HCA, a good faith estimate, they stick to it. I've heard before, I say that there are no not-for-profit hospitals. They're all for profit. Some are for tax and some are not for tax. The not-for-tax hospitals have a 15% margin built in because they don't pay tax to be fat and happy, and are they ever fat and happy? I've never worked for a not-for-tax hospital. A buddy of mine does. I said, hey, Norm, what's your margin? What's your budget? He said 1%, and I got a smile. That's it. So, put this up here. That's a interventional cardiologist I do a lot of work for CHM, and they're an awesome group. Do a lot of work for Kempton. They're amazing too. Love you guys. We bundle patients, bundle surgeries. This was a patient that came out of Louisiana. CHM flew her first class, her husband as well. Her husband, first time ever on an airplane. They checked in, they had luggage to check. They checked in at 44 minutes at the American desk, and they flew them first class. But they wouldn't let them take their bags because they were 1 minute late to the counter. So they gave them clear plastic bags, and they brought those on first class. And she's 27-year-old with a pacemaker, but and she did great. But so they had plastic bags, and so I thought, she called me and I said, "How's it going?" I said, "Great." They wouldn't let us check our bags. I said, "Oh, okay. Well, when you get in, let's talk." She got in and said, "Hey, what time are you and your husband going for dinner?" She told me the day before surgery. "Can you go?" I said, "Hi, I've got plans. I can't make it, but thank you." So just went out. My wife's prodding. Go get some new luggage. Drop it off at the hotel. Did that. May have given the front desk person a little bit to get me up into the room, open the door, and put the luggage in the room. So by the time the patient and her husband got back, there was brand new luggage waiting there for them, right in front of the plastic bags. And that just helps the whole experience. She had, of course, the care she was given was awesome. And Dr. Chocare is an amazing interventional cardiologist. But there's stuff like that we can do in this space that HCA and the rest of the hospitals never do. It wouldn't even cross their synaptic gap. They wouldn't understand. Why would you do that? Conversations back in the C-suite, when a patient complained about their out-of-pocket, the response is this, and you felt just really apathetic about the whole thing. It's like, well, you know what? I think you need a better health plan. Like, don't blame the hospital. It's your health plan. Your health plan sucks, and most of them do. But the traditional ones. Mentioned, in terms of the concierge service, we do try and go above and beyond with these bundles, and you all know how this works. I had a patient come in from Oregon for a hernia. The facility fee in Bend, Oregon at that surgery center was $26,000 for a simple umbilical hernia. The professional fee was another $6,000, and anesthesia was about $2,500. So you guys do the math. I called the administrator because it was an AmSurg. It is an AmSurg center. And I said, hey, Andy, I said, $26,000, it's a self-pay patient. I said, can you do any better? He goes, Shawn, you bought the center using your rates. Can't help you. So we bought the center in 2014. A single hospital provider town. You can well imagine what the rates are. My job at AmSurg was to develop what was called, among 5 other divisions, was called a hospital joint venture division. So where AmSurg owned 51% of the ASC, the surgeons owned 49%. We figured out, hey, if we can get legal to say we can divide up our controlling interest to 51%, sell the hospital 26%, so we get their contracts, right? So 2.5 or 3x what we were getting at that point in time. And AmSurg, I mean, we were doing more colonoscopies in Canada. That was our catchphrase. We did a lot of colonoscopies. They still do. But we, getting paid $625, where Baylor and in Dallas are getting $2,500 per colonoscopy. We thought, we want to get a piece of that pie, right? It's only fair. So we developed this hospital ASC joint venture division where we sold 26 of the 51 to the hospital. We got their rates. Our attorneys, and we had it OIG tested, our attorneys said, hey, if you maintain daily operational control, you hire, fire, those kind of things. Not the cliff events, in the governing board where you can't move it, you can't change the name, you can't sell it. That's the hospital side, and we had agreements in place for that as well. But because of that, the rates went up about 2.5 times on the reimbursement. So the physicians, the surgeon investors, didn't dilute down at all. So they got a 250% raise. We were pretty even, maybe a little more on the reimbursement. And the hospitals were happy because they became partners with us and a bunch of surgeons. That was done for a very long time. Medicare, a few years ago said no more. But that was a quick way to get some financial engineering in there, as we called it. And the thing is, when you're doing it, and that's what you're being rewarded for, I hate to say it, right? I had no second thoughts. I'm reporting to the board, had to get it done. And it's, as we talk about, the rules are perverse. So I talk about confessions that really should be maybe behind a door with my minister. But any event, this is some of the reasons why I love doing what we're doing here in the free market system. And it's very focused for me, but never been happier. Love what I'm doing. It's just getting close to the patients and working with folks that really care as well. We're all aligned. Man, it feels really good. Finally, it feels fantastic. Thank you all very much for your time. And if you'd like to call me, please do. We have a surgery center in San Antonio that we're doing hearts and spines and some other stuff. But any event, appreciate your time. And so I hope I didn't ramble on too much. Thank you.